Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We are back with D. Lotta O'Neill. We were supposed to have Twyla, but good old Twyla, she actually got sick this week. She called me on Saturday, and boy, she did not sound like she should be on a podcast. So we have that rescheduled later. Twyla, hope you sound better this week, and thank you for all you do for our community. D, how are you?
I'm doing well, EJ. I really am. I'm happy to be here. I'm sad to miss the conversation with Twyla, but I'm sure I'll listen to it later. But it was kind of a busy news week this week. So
it was, you know, and yeah, we're looking at having Twyla October 22nd. That's what we're looking at. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and kind of dive in. For those of you who maybe this is your first pod, we do 3 short stories, 1 big story about the city of Fort Worth, Texas. We hit politics, culture, art, environment, you know, anything kind of important about the future of the city. And then we end with wins and losses. So D, go ahead and bring us into story number 1.
Okay, so story number 1 is coming from the Fort Worth Report by Emily Wolfe. And it's the Tarrant Commissioners reject Girls Inc. funding over social issues. So the Tarrant County Commissioners voted Tuesday, I guess the week of October 3rd, to give some state-funded grants to some organizations. And 3 of the commissioners, including Tim O'Hare, Manny Ramirez, and Gary Fix, voted to reject those funds going to Girls Inc. of Tarrant County. In particular, it was like $117,000 specifically to a program called Girl Power that is supposed to address self-esteem issues in young girls in Fort Worth. And specifically, what Tim O'Hare outlined was the problem was that he didn't feel that public funds should be going to ideological organizations, in particular because of stances held by the national branch of Girls Inc. regarding LGBTQ rights, sex ed. And so Girls Inc. didn't get the money. I think they said the article mentions that about 20 people showed up to protest against it, which to me seems like a very small but vocal group of folks.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of them is the chief communication officer for Patriot Mobile. So it's not even that Patriot Mobile was mobilizing people. They were just using their people to then act like regular people protesting this. Lee Wamsgans, a South Lake resident who is the chief communication officer of Patriot Mobile, quote, said, "Girls Inc. is an extremist political indoctrination machine advocating for divisive liberal politics." So yeah, and then you also have Tim O'Hare's. The county government should not be funding, nor should the county government be passing through money from some other source for an organization that is so deeply or ideological, and encourage the children that they are teaching to go advocate for social change.
Yeah, that's wild, right? And I think the other thing that that I noticed from the story is that for this grant, like Girls Inc. advocates were there. And they talked about their mission. Like, their mission is to inspire all Tarrant County girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And we do that by tailoring our services with the girls in Tarrant County and their families, led by people who live in and love Tarrant County. Girls Inc. has received those funds since 2007. And of the kids that the organization serves, 85% of them are from low-income households, and nearly 90% are non-white. And they made it a point to say, like, our values are different. Like, our local organization, Tarrant County Girls Inc., is different than the national organization, and we don't always align. But that didn't matter. And that quote specifically, right, like social justice issues, given the population that Girls Inc. of Tarrant County is serving, like, just really infuriating and disheartening culture war nonsense. Like, can an organization that services young women of color from poor households ever not be too socially progressive for Tim O'Hare and Patriot Mobile? I don't know.
Like, that's just crazy. Like, you're mad that an organization is encouraging children to advocate for social change, for advocate for things they want to stand up for. That's just, And the crazy thing about Girls Inc. Incorporated, the nonprofit, it's been around since 1864. This is like not one of the most progressive organizations out there. And I'm not saying that from a shade to them if they're trying to be. I'm just saying, like, in hindsight of scale, this is a pretty down the lane centered kind of organization.
Yeah, and even I think it was the director that was present at this meeting, and I might be wrong, but one of their advocates did point out like some of the things that people were upset about, like the sexual education, wasn't even within the scope of the program that was being funded. But it just doesn't matter, and I think from some, I guess you could call them like right-wing groups or like very far-right conservative activists, like we've seen similar organization against other platforms like Planned Parenthood, for instance. And I guess it's just really, as a woman who identifies with the communities that are being served here, it's really frustrating. And I'm grateful, I guess, on the bright side, that $117,000 isn't a huge financial hit for Girls Inc. of Tarrant County, but I do feel very, very concerned about what fundraising looks like for programs that serve these communities moving on in the future, as our leadership at the county level insists on creating these like polarizing frameworks for these programs.
Yeah. This is a segment that just has turned into basically all about Tarrant County. I think we're going to start every show these days with Tarrant County and like give it a segment title like Tim, oh, here we go again. You know what I mean? That could be the segment. So Tim, oh, here we go again. He's now declining Girls Inc. 6 figures of dollars that they could use for the community. And 3 men are the ones who said no to women's empowerment. So let's move to the other story that we also found, is that they may not be spending the money on Girls Inc., but they are. Commissioners on October 3rd voted 4-1 with Commissioner Elisa Simmons dissenting to amend a contract for a feasibility study on the police center, that the Tarrant County Commissioners want more money to be for the law enforcement training, but now their study is saying you're not going to get that money. You got to find a more sustainable solution. So the amendment is estimated to cost $120,000 for a total contract cost of $229,000. Relatively same as the money we were going to try to give the Girls Inc. So, but what's really big here is that it's for like a study, and it just seems like a lot of money. Commissioner Manny Ramirez emphasized the importance of the revised study, highlighting that the first study came back with a higher price than initially expected. Once that price tag came back pretty high, the idea was to perhaps there's some intergovernmental leveraging we can use to bring that price down. The revised study should give commissioners a few options on how to do that. The first is to renovate or expand a current training academy at the Tarrant County Resource Coalition. The second option is blended approach with Tarrant County Sheriff's Office training activities located at TCC's Northwest campus, while operations remain at the Resource Connection. This option also includes evaluating the construction of an additional indoor gun range at the Northwest campus. They've been really wanting that indoor gun range. The third option would be to move all Tarrant County Sheriff's Office trainings and operations to TCC Northwest campus, expanding the campus's existing law enforcement training facility and police firing range buildings. Simmons asked to table this issue until commissioners got a more exhaustive briefing on the amendment. Nan Terry, a Fort Worth resident, also expressed reservations about the project and its speed. And I think that's what's really concerning about this, is that people are trying to use federal pandemic dollars for this, and these funds need to be allocated by the end of 2024, and the construction needs to be done by 2026. So with federal dollars needing to move so fast, and now our county spending it on things like this, they're trying to get around all the, red tape that is there for the government to make sure spending's going accordingly to the right places. Thanks for County Commissioner Simmons holding it down. We'd love to have on the pod, but if she comes on the pod, then I'm sure we're that would be a lot of political exhaustion. So, what's your take?
I actually really liked Nan Terry, the resident that spoke up. Like her advice, like I'd love to see a study about like what exactly do we need, because I'm still a little confused as to because these are a lot of things that are being pitched out, right? Like a huge law enforcement center, a gun range, educational partnerships, and it's like, no, really, like what do we need? Like what is what is it that we can't do without, right? Like they advocate a lot of like scrutiny on the budget and what is this money going towards, and I thought that the Komatsu study came back, right, because it was Komatsu Architecture who led the study and came back and they're like, oh yeah, the price tag is way too high. And it's like, okay, well, let's revisit and look at alternatives that are maybe more affordable. It's like, why didn't we start there? Yeah. Because when I go and shop for something for my house, right, like I make like we bought a house like 3 years ago, right? It's like, well, what do we have to have? Like we need a bedroom for the kids. We need a kitchen. We don't go and look at like the most luxurious piece of property or like, a pipe dream and then work our way back from that.
Yeah. And then pay six figures for it, At least if it was a real study. Like, at first when I saw the headline, I thought we wanted a library for the police. And I was like, you know what? Them reading more books would probably help them out. So let's put some real books in there so we can get educated. But then realize it was a research study. I can like, holy smokes. We're spending six figures on a research study to assess what renovations we should be doing for the police. Honestly, I think I like option number 3 of those 3 options, just because it's more interconnected with our community colleges. And that just seems like the easiest way to do training, because now it's on a campus where people who are trying to find careers are. So it just seems like if recruitment and presence, to me, that would make more sense.
I do think that this is a stronger path forward for them, not just for who they're trying to recruit, right? It would be great if they were trying to recruit individuals with like, post high school or some college experience, and also working alongside community. Like I think the profiles of students at the community college program tend to be a little bit more diverse. Yeah. And to me, that makes sense. I would love to understand why we need a giant gun range personally, but I'm not, I'm not from, I'm not a police officer or a law enforcement educator. But to me, I think the more partners you can bring at the local level, the stronger it tends to be for the community at large, and it makes it, just from an optics perspective, makes it seem less like we're building, a police palace.
Oh yeah. All right, so another option that we wanted to talk about is that a story about the Tarrant County leaders is a group had a forum at Doc Bookshop Community Frontline about the juvenile justice system. And basically, this is an article by Emily Wolf again. This is in the Fort Worth report, and it examines Tarrant County's juvenile systems last year, which an audit revealed a series of systemic issues: overcrowding, long stays in detention centers, and judge hearing few of their assigned cases. Well, it seems like if you're going to design something, this is what you should be designing right here to fix this. Those problems impact children of color the most. At the time of the audit, 92% of kids held in Tarrant County's juvenile detention center were minorities. 67% were black, and 25% were Hispanic. A very disheartening statistic. Community Frontline and local nonprofit focus on racial justice and education. They held this 2-hour panel, and they had pretty good players there. Tarrant County Juvenile Justice Director Benny Medlin. They had Quentin Phillips, who was a part of the school board, and then they had Frank Adler and A&M Law School student Danielle Honore on the panel. Since the audit findings were released, the system has made strides in addressing its overcrowding and lowered the lengths of stays, Medlin said, but works remain. Some of it comes down to available resources. Really, everyone on this just basically talked about the lack of resources, and the reason why we're bringing this up in the Tarrant County Commissioner corner of the podcast is just another example of how we took a bunch of ARPA dollars to pit to police and enforcement. And if we're going to pit $20 million to privatize jails, You could have also put a lot more money to your juvenile justice system and making sure that they could solve these problems. What was your take on any of it?
Honestly, Jay, like I'm in the same place with you. It's like I would really love an honest assessment about what kind of crime or what kind of public safety issues we're trying to address with all of this money and where it needs to go. And it seems like we need recruiting and training, right? Because time and time again, we're told that the sheriff's office, the Fort Worth Police Department is having a hard time filling these roles. But is there something fundamentally wrong with how we are policing our communities that might be contributing to like the recruitment problems? And so when I read stories like this, right, about this like, prison pipeline for young children, it's like, wouldn't it serve us well to figure that piece out first, or to at least put it on our priorities list? And then I think about, they're calling for a need for funding, but here we are seeing the Tarrant County Commissioners essentially like denying funds to a program like Girls Inc., which is serving like underserved communities. But that's too radical for them, right? It's quote unquote too woke. And so how will an organization secure those funds from public partners? Like, is that somewhere where like the city of Fort Worth has to step in to fill in that gap because like Tarrant County can't be relied on to work in the same way? I think it's a really hard question for people that are working in this space about how are they going to get the support that they need, and how as we community members can give them the support that they need to fix these systemic issues.
All right, so there was story number 1, and now we're going to move in short story number 2. I want to just also put out there for all of you who the big story is the city of dress that we do every year, where we kind of assess the mayor's state of the city that's ran by the Chamber of Commerce. That will be our big story, but we're going to continue with our short stories. So Dee, what is short story number 2?
The Fort Worth residents protest industrial development near their neighborhoods, and this is by Kamal Morgan on October 6th in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. So about a dozen people came out to the State of the City address at the Fort Worth Convention Center to protest what they call environmental racism in their communities. The protesters were part of a group called the Fort Worth Environmental Coalition of Communities, and they showed up with signs and posters displaying children and the pollution from 18-wheelers and industries. So these folks have been organizing for a while, and some of the members of this coalition include community representatives from Echo Heights. The Fort Worth Environmental Coalition formed in August to fight environmental racism in Fort Worth neighborhoods. So it's formed out of the Echo Heights and Stop 6 Environmental Coalition, which has been active for years to prevent the expansion of what's called an industrial growth center in Echo Heights. So the city of Fort Worth designated Echo Heights, which is in like the 76119 zip code, through its comprehensive plan and future land use plan that was developed like all the way back in 2000. And it's just a general guide for making decisions about the city's growth and development. Since then, the city has postponed updating the southeast sector of the comprehensive plan 3 times after the residents refused to allow further industrial or commercial development in the area. And the article does a great job of highlighting Letitia Wilborn, who helped form the coalition and the Environmental Coalition of Communities. So Wilborn goes on to point out that rates of adult asthma and low life expectancy in the 76119 zip code, which includes Echo Heights, means that the city should stop pollution. And she makes a very salient point, which is that she doesn't see this happening in white communities, and that, it really puts Black and brown people at risk. If you remember, and I think you and Anne might have touched on this, EJ, like in a previous podcast, but the city of Dallas, I think within like the past couple of years, did put out like a climate action plan. And Fort Worth is one of those cities that has refused to put one together. I think they have kind of a general, I forget what they're calling it. It's like an environmental master plan. But not really a climate action plan. And the article that we're discussing today makes a plan to note that, yes, there is data to suggest that there are like higher indices of asthma and health issues. So there's correlation, but no studies have been done yet to determine causation. That being said, what I've seen, like in my community practice, but also from a healthcare perspective, is that when you have community reporting like illness and things, that they're not feeling well, you should probably take note of that, like especially people that have been living there for a really long time. So you could say like, oh, well, we need to invest more resources in determining if industrial pollution is the cause of all of this, which would be nice. Or also we could just take them at their word that they're seeing the effects of like what their neighborhoods look like. The other thing that I thought when I saw this story was there is something that's called the Climate Vulnerability Index. And so this is a project, and I'll share the link with you so that you can put it in the show notes. But it's part of a Texas A&M project in partnership with the Environmental Defense Fund and Dark Horse Analytics, where it outlines climate vulnerability.
Are we going to stop funding Texas A&M now? Because this is progressive, too progressive for the county and the city.
This should be like, I think like this is the fact that Texas A&M is involved, and this is like a very wonky, like research-based discussion on what our region is going to look like in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It's something that I hope that more folks pay attention to. But so the index kind of gives data on how vulnerable our cities across the country are, our communities are to climate change. And specifically to the activists' point in Echo Heights, like when we look at those zip codes that they outline, most of them are, seeing like vulnerability index presence in like the 96th, 97th, 98th percentile. So these are areas, right? Like we see the data. So it's not just anecdotal. We see the data that they are areas that are really, really vulnerable to environmental effects and climate change. And I really hope that the city takes them into account and takes notice, right? And does something meaningful to address this.
Yeah, no, and someone who I think has been doing a great messaging for this is Sunrise Tarrant. Their Instagram is great. They have an Instagram that says, "Here's the receipts. Our neighborhood streets are choked by 18-wheelers. Our homes are located next door to chemical factories. Diesel plumbing pollute our clean air. Gas wells leak into our neighborhood's creeks and streams. Code enforcement rarely inspects the industry nearby. Our neighborhoods are ranked in among the most toxic in the nation," and this is what your thing shows. Also, they had demands. They weren't just protesting; they also had demands. Permanently remove the official industrial growth center designation from Echo Heights SE sector on all city planning maps. Roll back downzone proposed unoccupied industrial tracts in Echo Heights on all those maps. Quit encouraging encroachment on the neighborhood. Declare a moratorium on new 1M IMIR industrial zoning into Echo Heights until new 2050 comprehensive plan is approved. Make currently zoned industrial use and uses non-conformed and relocate. There's about 5 more of those, but they weren't just, saying, "Oh, we just have a problem with no strategy." They have details of what's going wrong and what are some ways we can solve it.
And I see a lot of conversations in like urban planning spaces about like community-led design. And this is an example of that, right? Like, the city is saying like, this is what your community is going to look like. Like we've identified that you're going to be this industrial hub. And the community is telling us like, no, we want it to look differently. And I wish there were a smoother process for them or an easier process for them to vision out what their community should look like and how those areas should be developed and to have a seat at that table. It's the fact that they're protesting the state of the city address tells me that they clearly don't feel that they have that right now.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and move into short story 2, which is also something you're passionate about. Short story 3, and that's the Rachel Barrett's October 1st article on the Fort Worth Report about affordable child care projects underway despite uncertain plan to bridge funding gap. You even just kind of talk about nonprofits as a whole a lot about this issue with ARPA funds. So we'd love for you to just dive in here and share what you see.
Yes. So, 4 new childcare providers will be created in Tarrant County in partnership with Federal Early Head Start program, which provides free all-day childcare for low-income families, children aged 0 to 3. So something I should share that I think I've touched on briefly, but maybe some listeners don't know is I'm a mom. I have a great 13-year-old, and then I also have an 18-month-old at home. And we live in a dual-income household, my partner and I. And I'm a worker. I'm part of this labor force. And oh my gosh, was I completely unprepared for navigating the childcare space when my son was born. And I think I might have even texted you independently, EJ, oh my gosh, we're drowning, because it took us a year to find a spot in a daycare. And, this was with not a lot of money, but we had thankfully at the time in our budget money to allocate for childcare expenses. And so if you're coming from a place where that isn't accessible, not only are you competing with a dearth of education providers or of early childcare providers, but also resources. So I was really happy to see that more attention was being paid to this space, because I know that for folks that don't have some of the privileges that my household has, to me, it seems like an impossible situation. Child Care Associates submitted applications to the county in June totaling about $24 million to be considered for funding by the county. And the county initially said it would approve the funding by June 16th, but then the county declined to pay the requested $24.7 million to build 4 new child care facilities. Instead, the county allocated about $15 million, and it created a $9.2 million shortfall. And the change, essentially, what it's going to affect is the project's contingency fund, which covers cost increases due to inflation or unexpected challenges. The shortfall, as the article points out, is part of a broader county reprioritization of one-time federal dollars. And the county voted to spend less federal dollars from ARPA funds on housing, childcare, and public health, while allocating more to law enforcement projects and inmate housing. So, oh my gosh, how timely, right? That we're having this discussion about the prison pipeline, right? And juvenile justice. And that we're also talking about law enforcement and keeping our neighborhoods safe and clean. But at the same time, we're seeing that unwillingness to fund what's needed to create supportive environments for our young people. I think a lot about, I think this is a really good point. Yes, it's a great program. I'm glad we're putting money here, but also this is a one-time infusion of cash that in terms of our public policies, how the state is governed, how the county is governed, how the city is governed, and where we're choosing to allocate resources, where will those dollars come from in the future to support these programs? And are we putting a lot of burden on the nonprofit sector to solve this for us? Because where are they going to get the money, right? If the public isn't providing it, how many private donors, how many corporations are going to chip in to help address this?
No, and I think the challenge, too, it just seems like if we just saw this as the solution to have less reactive policing, for the long good of people having good educations, good health care, good child care, good homeless strategies around them that can allow them to find stability. It just, to me, this is stuff that should be seen as proactive to their crime, kind of agenda stuff. Even this, I know that this is not something that's politicized or talked about enough, but childcare just to me seems also benefits the long term of kids who end up getting in trouble, kids who end up falling into a system. So all the stories beforehand, I just feels like this should be something we should be wanting to fund, the way we want to fund a gun range. Gun range is a reaction to problems, where this, by having early childcare for all, in some capacity, is truly a way to make sure there's less and more safe places to live long term.
Yeah, it strikes me as probably like more of a strategic investment than just a reactionary one. And, for low income families, we know that poverty like follows you throughout your life. So when we talk about like, oh, we have to prepare our workforce, right? We have to make sure that we're like creating an economy of people or like a labor economy that's like ready to compete for the jobs that are coming. Like, yes, but also like that starts now. That starts with like young children now that are 0 to 3. And so if we're not paying attention to that, we're already behind. Yeah. And even if, thinking about equity in this space or philanthropy in this space is kind of a reach for you as a business owner, like women are in the workforce, right? Families are in the workforce, and we have to be able to account for that. And so I think it really behooves the business community to be more invested in this conversation, to make sure that we have folks that are able to enter the workforce without having to worry about, well, who's going to take care of my babies? Yeah. Something that I am encouraged by the story. For what it's worth, Manny Ramirez said that Manny, like I know him on a first name basis. I don't. But Manny Ramirez did say that, one of the reasons that the county didn't fund the project in its entirety was because they were really hoping that the city would step up or the Tarrant County College District would step up. I'm very, very hopeful, especially about the second part of that, because also like having been a single mom when I went through the college system, like, oh, that just seemed like so clear to me. Like, why don't we have childcare support that's tied to our education initiatives at the post-secondary level? So I'm hopeful, but gosh, I wish it were more a priority.
Yeah, and it's good to see here. Councilmember Michael Crane heard the funding shortfalls will be impacting Child Care Associate Project at Las Vegas Trail. So he asked city management to ensure the city will be able to fill the gap. And what's interesting here that people don't realize is like when you look at the history, this idea that like mothers stayed home is much of a white history thing, like, and so I think a lot of like traditional conservative Republicans, like they look at, oh, well, they may not relate to this because when they were younger, their mom or some adult was around to assist, but with now today's generation where you have to have two people working, it's just a different world than maybe the boomers grew up in. But and also it shows that black families have had dual income working for ages, to pay bills. And so I just think like it's just such a disconnect from the old way that they've maybe saw what a family is and how a family operates to today's age, where most likely the female is not only just working, probably making more income. You're living also probably more educated. So it's just like there's so much need to support this as women continually to thrive through the education system and higher ed and in the workforce and getting leadership positions. So it's just it does not make sense, especially when our population is declining. We need more people to be excited to want to be productive in the economy of our country, and we need to make it as easy as possible to play. That's just how it has to happen.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to the organizations that are tackling this really, really important issue. I just hope that they get the support that they need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Love it. Thank you for bringing it up and sharing your story as you have cute kids. And we'll go ahead and move into the big story. We have Fort Worth State of the City 2023 Mayor Mattie Parker's address. You also had this is basically every year. The Fort Worth Chamber does a annual event. It's in the convention center. There's all these, Fort Worth always have like these yippee-ki-yays, I call them, where they just talk about all their like cool stuff. They just, so Visit Fort Worth does one. They do a yippee-ki-yay. And then the Chamber does a yippee-ki-yay. Those are like two of the bigger ones. But anyways, this is where we talk really great on all the things that are going on. There's several articles, but then there's also the actual video where Mattie Parker has on YouTube on the City of Fort Worth website, which will be in the show notes. I'm going to pass it to you. You've watched it a couple times. We kind of read the articles. What were some of your initial takes?
I had a few. I think Mayor Parker as a communications professional, I think Mayor Parker is a great communications person. Like she can spin stories like no other, right? It sounded really positive, very pro business, very uplifting. But, when I put like my artist hat on and like I try to like critically evaluate like, well, how is this being presented? What are we getting? There were some things that concerned me, and I can't shake the feeling that this continues to be a story of two Fort Worths. I saw a conversation that was really, really targeted to our business community. I think first and foremost, when I think about who the audience for that was, I think, EJ, you were really curious to point out, like, even on the video, I think that as of today, it was 100 views for the English version, and there is a Spanish version, which I didn't catch the first time. So good on the city of Fort Worth for producing that. But I think that only has like 20 views, which I think is indicative of like the job that we still have to do as a municipality to do community engagement and outreach communities and prioritize the communications department to communicate well with its citizens. But it still does feel a little bit like a story of two Fort Worths. There were a lot of wins that she highlighted in the public space, particularly around houselessness, and about the programs that are being initiated there. But again, those are programs that are primarily supported by ARPA dollars. And, she said that in particular, her language was that these wins that we're seeing are a reflection of good policy, but for many years, our city policy has been to kind of withdraw from a lot of these welfare programs and to keep a very trim budget as a city. And so I question, like, is this a policy win, or did we get like an influx of cash from the federal government and we're choosing to finally pay attention to these things that we've kind of withdrawn from?
Yeah. And then the investment is showing a positive return to the city, and you're going to take the outcome but not acknowledge that this was federal policy that we've challenged and complained about, and now that's coming to an end. So it's going to be interesting to see what does this address looks like next year. I mean, I guess there will still be the ARPA dollars, so you really wouldn't be until probably 2027 when you really see the other side of how whatever they said today isn't true. But no, I to me, right off the bat, we have to remember that Mike Berry with Hillwood, and the master of creating Alliance Texas, which at the end of the day, Mike Berry is a very conservative, traditional capitalist, and I am a fan of Mike Berry and all he's done for Fort Worth, and what they've done in Alliance. It's just remarkable to make Fort Worth truly competitive for decades to come. Unfortunately, it comes from an old school business model lens, and now that he became interim president of the chamber when the last chamber person left, you can clearly see what kind of culture Mike Berry operates in this new chamber state of address. It was much more polished. It was much more just felt like industry, like it felt like a manufacturing culture, or like if you worked in a place with a lot of white men who are focused on efficiencies and productivity. And it just sound very pro-business, but then also just pro kind of old school business. And I think why it didn't work for Mattie as much is that I think Mattie came off like she was 20 years older than she actually is. Like, she's our age. So that was probably my big like loss of it all. And then obviously I'm tired of the whole city thing. We talk about that all the time. San Francisco, New York City, and you pick all these blue states. She did. I was really shocked that she jabbed at Dallas, especially after the mayor going Republican. I'm surprised that, she would bring up Dallas. But I think that story just has to stop altogether.
I don't know that there's anything more Fort Worth than taking a jab at Dallas.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did catch that. And the other thing that I caught was, right, like when she presented things like the order of priority and like obviously like public safety has been one of her big talking points this year. It was brought up again here, particularly as public safety relates to a friendly business climate. And she brought up that Target story. It was a national story about how Target was choosing to close down specific stores and quote unquote liberal cities. And I've heard so many people repeat that talking point, but if you look into it closely, what Target is saying doesn't exactly line up with their business practices. And I'm happy to share some links with you. I think there's one investigative reporter in particular that said that looked at like one of the stores that Target was closing in New York in like Spanish Harlem is actually moving like 3 blocks away. And so it's weird that we take that at face value. So that to me is concerning. There are some things that I liked, right? Like how she brought up a community land trust, like that community land trust project. That's something that I did some research on as an arts project about 10 years ago. And it's nice to see the city like kind of come in and step into these like more progressive urban planning spaces to solve some of these problems. But there was a lot of signaling in the talk about our identity. It's weird, right? Because I guess I've thought for some time now, for a few years now, that identity is still very mutable, like who we are as a city, right? Like a big city that works like a small town, cow town. And I saw in various points like them kind of doubling down on like, no, this is our identity. They're coming here because it is cow town. And it's like, do we all agree that that's our identity? I don't know.
Yeah, because like going back to like she could have came off younger, like Fort Worth is also becoming a younger city. She brought none of that up. How young and diverse and all the Tech Fort Worth competitions with money going to all these different businesses, people of color, women, none of that to me was really talked about. You talked more about cops and policing and cops and fire positions more than you talked about the youthful talent of your city. That was the biggest miss.
And I've seen some data too of the people that are moving from other states to Fort Worth. Like I think the plurality are millennials. Like that's young.
Yeah. Millennials who are educated, who are looking to start their families with housing. And you have to know that 4 of every 10 Californian is Hispanic. So, it equates to Caucasian population. And so odds are, so I just felt like that was a miss to really celebrate the youthfulness. And because she's youthful, she is a young mayor. And that's something that I think she lost by getting too Mike buried, in my opinion, and just making it to the Hillward Alliance culture. It felt like Alliance rented a convention center and did a talk. And I think that's the other argument that I think we need to, why the whole, like if you actually travel and you go to cities and states, and for me, I've been into 800 schools across the country in 46 states. I was in Philly ISD last week. I'm going to Montana this week. It's hard to judge cities and their safety off of like comparables to other cities, especially when you don't share all the data. Like I think to me, Fort Worth should have an honest, we may not do it externally, but internally, we should look at our data by the loop, like just the density of an actual city, and then look at the far north Fort Worth as its own data. Because if you added in the burbs to Dallas, if you added in the burbs to Milwaukee, if you added in the burbs of Portland, heck, you'd be in East Oregon if you added the amount of land we count as Fort Worth. Their numbers would be the same as ours, Fort Worth. And this whole New York losing, people, and we're gaining people. We would have to like New York would have to lose people for 1,000 years, and we would have to gain people at the same amount in order to be the size of New York. New York is so much bigger. It's like 8 to 10 times bigger than Fort Worth. And then when you add Metro and all that, it just even gets bigger. So it's just like all this relatability to those, it's just goofy. And anyone who gets excited about that message is just hasn't traveled in a very long time.
Yeah, it's weird to dunk on these cities. Like,
Yeah.
because that's what it feels like we're dunking on them, like, oh, we're so much better. But like people are coming from those cities and they probably have some relationship to there. And anecdotally, like in the traveling I've been doing recently, like people do talk about in New York or in Sacramento or in LA. Yeah, things are expensive. Like I want to move because I want to pay rent. I want to afford a house. And we have the privilege of having a lot of land to be developed here. Like, I think that was actually a part of the state of the city, right? Like, how much open land we have. But what happens if we don't have good land use policies or when we don't have more land to develop? Like, we're going to see some of those same affordability issues, I think, as like bigger cities. The more dense we become, and the more people move here and the more we grow. I think it's just a matter of time. So it's just kind of like an odd, like early time to start dunking on them. And then two, again, with like the policy thing, she's like, oh, we've had all these policies that have like made these gains and like these social sectors. And it's like, well, those were ARPA dollars, but as a policy, like we're still cutting the property tax level. Like we still believe in keeping a really trim budget. We're relying on public-private partnerships, right? To take the role of some of the investments that we need in like the social sphere. But how are we building capacity for those things to continue? And that to me isn't quite clear yet. And, you know, she mentioned some successful private partnerships like the Botanic Gardens or the zoo. Yeah. Yes, those are great. But also, like, what do they look like when they're not as effective? I think there's probably a handful of organizations that we could point to that are struggling. Like look at the community arts center in the building, right? Like they're having a hard time fundraising. They couldn't fundraise enough to take care of like their pairs of the building on their own. And then also, like, what does diversity in the private sphere look like? You know, she touted, like, the gains on city council, like our first Latina or Latinx Latina representative on city council, the first, like, woman council person. I forget for which district it was, EJ, you might have to remind me.
It was Macy Hill's district.
Macy Hill, exactly. Yeah. 7. Great. Like, you know, the face of leadership is starting to change. Is that reflected in like our private social organizations, on our boards, on staff, in leadership positions? I don't know. And the other part to me is like the donors, right? Like, because donors have a lot of power in nonprofit organizations. And is our donor base correlating with how our demographics in the city are changing or the communities that they're serving? And I don't know.
Yeah. And yeah, there's so many things you just hit there, but the first one I think is like you said something around density. And to me, an honest estimate on crime would be comparing your cities to density ratios, like other cities that at your density. Because I would argue, my hypothesis would be if you compared Fort Worth's crime to other areas that had similar density, we would be at the top. Yeah, so it's like that kind of stuff. It's like I think that's one. It's like you can't compare it to the high dense places, and so like that's something I think like is a way to be more honest about safety and all that. But this is not a place to be honest. This was clearly classic propaganda to push the agenda forward, and we just had to watch it. And I think that's what we saw. And it wasn't that, I don't know. I battle with, you know, clearly Hillwood and Alliance knows what they're doing and it's working. But it just goes back to for who is it working for? And, you know, if Alliance is going to gain all this power, what does it do to the inner loop of the city, which is more diverse, more progressive, more youthful? And it goes back to our conversation with, you know, the reason why people are moving out of San Francisco and all these places is because all these STEM professionals who, you know, got the Google jobs are making $250,000, and now those places are expensive to live in. And technically economic development is trying to bring innovative companies to Texas A&M and to Fort Worth downtown. And so 50 years from now, if they're successful, the same problem will happen to us, where a bunch of $250,000 STEM people will be taking these jobs in Fort Worth, and that house that once cost this will no longer cost that, because now you're competing with this elevated, educated STEM class of people, which is what happens in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, New York. Heck, Austin, Texas is an example of how that happened when coast jobs got to the center of the country. So we're doing it to ourselves in a way.
Yeah, I think it's a little early to start dunking. That's my big takeaway.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we can. You also mentioned transit was not even discussed. That was a huge another. Yeah.
But like in all of this, especially with like the initiative about preserving green spaces, right? She's saying like over half of our, like about roughly half of our land is like available for development, and we have to like conserve green spaces. And specifically, she brought up the Joni Mitchell song, Big Yellow Taxi, which was her mom's favorite. And it's like they've paved paradise to put up a parking lot. You know what everyone is bringing? They're bringing cars, because we don't have public transit in a way that's suitable for like high growth, like high density environments. And gosh, like we're touting like how quickly we're growing, and there's not a conversation about like this is what we're doing to plan for all of that growth and to accommodate and to preserve those green spaces so that we don't have like 20-lane highways because everybody has a car. That was odd. That was kind of a glaring omission to me.
Yeah, that was a spot on one too. The whole public transit piece, like no mention of Trinity Metro, no mention of all the good stuff that part of your community is doing. Like, why bring up cops but not bring up, you have of transportation? It kind of seems like they're both important to this whole this whole message.
Yeah. I would think like, me, like when I think about what are the forces that are like really going to shape our city, right? It's the education piece, the education partnerships. It's going to be like the development, right? Like how we're engaging developers, like how we're forming land use policies. And a big part of that is transit. And I think they did have like a thank you or something. I remember hearing the name, but it wasn't in the big wins. Yeah. And they have been doing really good work lately, I think, with the resources they've been given.
Yeah. 100%. So you can watch it for yourself. Let us know what you think about the city address. We will keep kind of updates on what happens throughout as we continue to do this podcast weekly. We're going to finish off with wins and losses. D, what is your loss?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have a lot of losses this week, EJ. Actually, like despite some of the news stories, I think generally I feel a little hopeful. Maybe my loss would be they're touting creative business in the state of the city. Gosh, it would be nice if we paid more attention to creative industry and to creative entrepreneurs. I think that's where like arts funding comes in. Yeah. I think we tend to like divorce it and think of like arts as, oh, someone's making like paintings and sculptures, but they're actually like creative entrepreneurs. And just like we have Tech Fort Worth or like very specific programs to address like specific elements of small business, it would be nice if we broaden that a little bit. I think I sent you some links earlier in the week in a different conversation about like other creative incubator systems that are happening around the country. And I'd love to start that with you if you're out there listening. So maybe that's my loss.
So I can give you two losses since you couldn't, you're like, man, I'm going to keep it light. One we could agree on is losing Kaylee Johnson as a reporter for the Star-Telegram. 5 years at Star-Telegram. Kaylee Johnson was a powerhouse. I mean, she was a part of that core of rock stars we just had in that were just really doing it. I mean, Nicole Manna, Luke Ranker, like we just had some real G's at the Star-Telegram. So she's kind of last of the dying breed of like that kind of cohort of reporters we had. It sounds like she'll still do freelancing, might be sticking around. And heck, if she's doing freelancing, sticking around, we would love to have you on the pod because now you could be on the pod. But if not, also, just kudos to you and all the success. And then my other loss was, I don't know if you saw Seth Bodine's story about F-35 jets. This is a crazy stat. Lockheed Martin's F-35 Lightning II jets are mission ready only half the time because of maintenance and repair issues, according to a new report from the Government Accountability Office, an independent, nonpartisan agency that works for Congress. The F-35 fleet mission-capable rate, the percentage of time that aircraft can perform one of its tasks and missions, was about 55% in March 2023, far below program goals. We spend a lot of money on the military complex that we have here, and a lot of Fort Worth businesses that do thrive here is in this space, and to see that they can't get their stuff to be more sustainable and consistent is just like, I'm surprised it's just not talked about more. Like, if we weren't such politically driven, like, these are the things I feel like they should be talking about in the city address. Like, okay, how do we like become more optimized and efficient with our technologies, so that we can actually take these federal dollars and tax dollars and make jets and military equipment that works for the American people. Seems like what we should be talking about. Anyways, those are my two losses.
Yeah, Kaylee Johnson, and just I mean, her beat has been a lot of like criminal and justice investigative reporting, and the more emphasis that we place, or the more that criminal justice becomes a priority for our ecosystem, it's a big loss. And I'm really hoping that she finds a space and that she's able to stick around and continue her good work, because we need it. So it's a really relevant big loss. And then as far as wins go, I'm going to have two wins. The weather is really nice. It's been like 100 plus, 109, 10 plus degrees. It feels like all summer, and I have two young boys and we can't leave the house. And there are not a lot of things to do that are air conditioned that are like child friendly sometimes, it seems. So it's nice to be outside. So cheers to that. And then second, Fort Worth Report had a great story on the local art scene that touched on some national conversations, and a very, I guess, like a very controversial piece called White Men Who Paint Landscapes Aren't Artists. It's pretty inflammatory, but the work was really interesting, and I don't see a lot of like art reporting that really gets into the nitty-gritties of it, and it was just such a fun, really interesting story, and touched on some things that I really care about. So I encourage you to read them and support the Fort Worth Report and Marquita Fornoff.
Yeah, no, when we talked about it offline, it was off air. It was hilarious. Like that this is all happening in Fort Worth. Like, I think it was great. Like, just to have that kind of braveness of expression about the systemic issues with art support, like supporting art in communities. So really cool stuff. I think the win could be our economic development team in the mix of all of that, because of, I know the mayor says all these stories about us in the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and all these stuff. That is because our marketing team and our communication team economically are pitting in the investment, spending dollars to get stories placed for Fort Worth. And so the win is that, like, a lot of what Mattie or the mayor makes it sound like people are just writing about Fort Worth. So that could be like the loss. But the win is that we have proactive teams of people getting Fort Worth names out there. And I think that's an okay thing for people to know, because it's an honest interpretation of how the game works. And I think we are playing the game really well for how little dollars we put into economic development.
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about like communications, right? That like we as like the city, like the formal city of Fort Worth, could probably pay more attention to its communications department and make sure that's really well funded so that we can engage audiences effectively. And like economic development communications team. Like, that is work. Those stories don't just happen because someone really cares about Fort Worth. It's because someone was out there building the relationship and telling a good story. And props to them for that happening, and that the mayor was able to incorporate those wins in her state of the city.
Cool. Well, there we have it. We have another full episode for you guys. You've been great. If you've been listening for a while, definitely hit a 5 stars or share a review. Your comments and thoughts on this allows us to keep going. Your last week, all the messages that I got saying how awesome that episode was, and just saying do what you got to do and keep going. And you guys are great. It was just really good to see. And then also just share with another Fort Worthian. If we got a lot of new people moving here, hey, let's find a way to share that. And another thing is, maybe the next thing for me to do is also, how do we maybe find this interpreted in Spanish? I'm starting to see Spotify allowing an AI kind of piece reinterpret. We don't know how good that model is to do so, but maybe there's also ways for us to start getting this message out there, not just in English.
I would love that, EJ. Happy to support that.
Yes.
I'm all about language justice.
Cool. Well, everyone have a beautiful day, and see you next week.
Follow us like